The file had no cover designation. It arrived through no known diplomatic channel. It simply appeared in the Keth Dominion Central Archive at 0300 station time, a single document, 947 pages, bearing the seal of a species that had been declared extinct 296 years ago. Archon designate Thesiverin stared at the first page for a long time before calling anyone. He was a careful creature by nature. 3 meters of pale gray carapace and cold calculation, 12 years into a posting most Keth considered a reward. The neutral corridor needed management, not genius. Nothing happened here. Nothing had happened here for 3 centuries, not since the unification mandate had swept through 17 systems and simplified the political landscape in ways that certain historians were no longer permitted to describe in detail. He read the title again. A complete record of actions taken against and in support of humanity, Sol descended, from the period 2187 CE to 2203 CE. Compiled by the Office of Memory, Remnant Fleet Designation, we who were not there. He called his senior analyst, Pethavar, whose family had served Keth administration for 6 generations. She appeared on screen, sleepless and faintly alarmed by the hour. Has anyone else received this? Thesiverin asked. Every diplomatic archive in the corridor received it simultaneously, Pethavar said. 43 separate governments. The Velan are already responding. The Muir Collective has gone silent. A pause. The document has a cover letter. Read it. She did. To those who remember us, and to those who thought they had finished remembering, we are returning. We carry no weapons charged. We carry only what was always ours, a complete accounting. We intend to settle every line of it. We begin with what we owe. Amara Osebansu, Consul Keeper, Remnant Fleet. The Anance dropped from transit exactly where the message said it would, at the edge of the corridor's monitored space, alone, running no shields. Thesiverin had 47 warships positioned at maximum defensive spread, and he watched the single human vessel on his display with the particular stillness of a creature who had not yet decided what to be afraid of. It was not a warship. It was not a generation vessel. It was something in between. Broad-bellied and ancient-looking, its hull plated in a deep reddish-brown material his sensors couldn't quite classify, covered in what appeared to be text. Thousands of lines of text, engraved directly into the exterior hull. Archon. His tactical officer, a young Keth named Rosavar who had never seen a military engagement, kept her voice level with visible effort. Their hull plating. We've run translation matrices. It's names. The hull is covered in names. How many? A silence that lasted too long. We stopped counting at 400,000. The Anance requested a docking corridor in fluent Keth standard. No translator delays, no consultation pauses. Someone aboard had spent a long time learning the language. The human who came through the airlock was not what Thesiverin had been briefed to expect. She was small, even for her species, older, her dark skin carrying the kind of lines that came from decades of calculation rather than sun. She wore no uniform. She carried a physical book, bound in black, and she held it the way Keth religious scholars held their sacred texts, not reverently, but carefully, the way you hold something that contains everything breakable. Archon designate. Her Keth standard was flawless, her tone the temperature of deep space. My name is Amara Osebansu. I am the Consul Keeper of the Remnant. You sent a 900-page document to every government in the corridor, Thesiverin said, and then arrived alone. The document is the first volume, Amara said. I have 11 more. They gave her the formal meeting chamber because Thesiverin could think of no protocol that applied and defaulted to the highest available option. She sat across from him with archivist Yusuf Bergstrom at her right. A quiet man, gray-haired, who had not spoken yet and seemed to be counting something in his head, and she placed the black book on the table between them. You should understand, Thesiverin said carefully, that the mandate's actions 3 centuries ago, while regrettable in certain particulars. I didn't come to discuss the mandate, Amara said. I came to open the ledger. The ledger. Every species that assisted humans during the mandate years. Every individual who provided aid, shelter, false documentation, supply diversion, medical care. She touched the book's spine. Every kindness given to a people who had nothing to offer in return. We have spent 300 years finding out what those acts cost the givers. And we intend to repay each one, with compound interest calculated against the giving party's own economic framework, before we discuss anything else. Thesiverin felt the first thread of something cold move through him. He had expected demands. Grievances. Perhaps a species returned from extinction with the particular violence of things that should have stayed buried. This was not that. You're paying debts, he said. We are keeping our word, Amara said, to people who helped us when keeping their word to us could have gotten them killed. The Velan ambassador arrived at the station 6 hours later, having apparently been waiting in nearby space for Amara's first meeting to conclude. Thesiverin watched the greeting through security feeds and felt something he could not yet name. The Velan representative, a young diplomat named Sethavari, approached Amara in the corridor outside the meeting chamber. There was an exchange Thesiverin had to replay 3 times before he fully processed it. Sethavari said. My grandfather told me, before he died, that he had given water and a direction to a human child during the Carthage station evacuation. He never knew if the child survived. Amara looked at her for a long moment. Then she opened the black book to a page marked with a worn ribbon and turned it so Sethavari could read. Carthage Station, Day 11. Sethavari Kunavel, then serving as a junior logistics officer, provided 2 liters of water and verbal navigation to a child aged approximately 7 years, identified as Priya Medose, granddaughter of the consul keeper's maternal line. The child survived. The action was taken at personal risk, as Velan personnel had been ordered to deny aid to evacuating humans under threat of mandate audit. Sethavari stood very still. She was my grandmother, Amara said quietly. She told us about your grandfather every year until she died. We wrote it down every time. By the second day, Thesiverin had stopped sleeping. The Velan had received their full accounting, not just symbolic acknowledgement but a transfer of material resources, technology, and navigational data that Pethavar had calculated as accurately representing the compounded value of that long-ago kindness across 3 centuries of interest. The Velan Foreign Office had released a statement saying only that the debt was more than settled, which told him more about the calculation size than any number would have. 14 other species had been contacted. 14 separate, private accountings had been delivered. Species that had thought themselves entirely uninvolved in a centuries-old atrocity were discovering that they had, in small and large ways, been on the right side of it, and that the people they had helped had spent 300 years in hiding, remembering. They're dismantling the coalition, Pethavar told him, and her voice had changed in a way he didn't like. Something had shifted in her, some architectural assumption had quietly given way. Every species that receives a kindness repayment becomes publicly, demonstrably in humanity's debt of gratitude. They can't oppose whatever comes next without appearing to reject the moral framework they themselves provided. The humans have turned the ledger into a structural weapon. They haven't threatened a single party. They're just settling accounts, and the settlements are reconfiguring every alliance in the corridor. And the other side of the ledger, Thesiverin said. The debt's owed to them. They haven't opened it yet. He sat with that for a long time. Have you read the full document? He finally asked. All 947 pages. Pethavar's carapace had done something subtle around the facial ridge, the Keth expression he associated with a very particular kind of dread. Archon, they documented everything. Every mandate action. Every government that collaborated. Every official who signed orders, and what those orders produced. Names, dates, witness accounts, genetic evidence where the witnesses did not survive. A pause. The Keth Dominion appears in the document 412 times. He already knew this. He had read his own entries. Under what categories? Collaboration. Supply provision. 3 instances of direct operational command. She looked at him directly for the first time since the document had arrived. And 1 instance of individual protection. A Keth border administrator named Tevashuvhal who falsified 9 transit documents for a human family in 2196 and was subsequently reassigned under investigation. The administrator died before the investigation concluded. Thesivran was very still. His grandfather had been reassigned in 2196. He had never known why. Amara returned to the meeting chamber on the 3rd day. She sat down, placed the black book on the table again, and opened it to a new section, marked with a red ribbon. "We're ready to discuss the second half of the ledger," she said. Thesivran had prepared arguments. Legal frameworks. Precedent citations. The language of sovereign immunity and temporal distance and the impracticality of applying modern accountability to historical governance structures. He had prepared all of it, and sitting across from her, he could feel it becoming useless in real time. "Before you begin," he said, and his voice was not quite what it had been 3 days ago, "I need to ask you something." She waited. "You could have come back with a fleet. With whatever you've spent 3 centuries building in whatever space you retreated to. You have the coordinates of every mandate collaborator, every government structure that participated, every living heir of every official who signed orders." He looked at the book. "Why this?" Amara's expression didn't change. But something around her eyes did, a tiredness so deep it had passed through grief and come out the other side into something almost like peace. "Because we know what fleets do," she said. "We know what happens to the ledger when you let anger write it." She placed her hand flat on the book's cover. "Our dead deserve better accounting than that. They deserve to be remembered correctly, not as the reason for a war, but as people who existed, who were helped by some and destroyed by others, and whose lives had specific, calculable weight." She looked at him steadily. "We didn't come back to make you afraid, Archon Designate. We came back to make you pay attention. And the debts," he said. "The ones owed to you. What do you intend to collect?" "Acknowledgement," she said. "Full, public, permanent acknowledgement in every government's official record. Removal of every mandate-era law still on the books in 12 systems. Territorial access rights for human settlement in 3 corridor sectors, surveyed and provided within 5 years. She paused. "And one more thing." She reached into her jacket and placed a second, smaller book on the table beside the first. It was worn nearly to nothing, clearly older than the black one, clearly handled by hundreds of pairs of hands over many decades. "A complete copy of the names on the Anant's hull," she said. "Every one of them. Filed in the corridor's central archive. Permanently. So that no government can claim, in any future century, that they did not know those people existed." Thesivran looked at the 2 books on the table between them. The Ledger of Kindnesses Repaid. The Ledger of Names. He thought about his grandfather, reassigned in 2196, dying before an investigation concluded, and what that investigation had been examining, and what it meant that the humans had marked his grandfather's action in their records as protection given at personal risk. He thought about what the Anant's hull looked like from outside, all those names, engraved into the metal that carried the survivors home, so that the dead traveled with the living and were not lost. "I will need to consult with the Dominion Council," he said, finally. "Of course." Amara closed the black book. "We've waited 300 years, Archon Designate. We're very good at waiting." 6 hours later, standing alone on the observation deck as the Anants held steady in the distance, Thesivran looked at the ship through the viewport and understood, at last, what made humanity genuinely terrifying. Not their technology. Not their numbers. Not whatever they had built in 3 centuries of invisible survival. It was that they had refused, against every incentive, to let grief make them sloppy. They had grieved with precision. They had catalogued their dead, honored their debts, and returned not as conquerors but as creditors, carrying not weapons but something far more permanent, far harder to answer, far more difficult to survive. A complete accounting, perfectly kept, by a people who had learned that memory, maintained with absolute fidelity, was the only revenge that lasted. Outside, the light from a distant star caught the Anant's hull, and for just a moment the Siveran could almost read the names. Somewhere in that list, he knew, was a child who had survived because someone gave her water and a direction. That child had told the story every year until she died. And every year, someone had written it down.